The man in the tailored Navy suit stood quietly at the boarding gate as whispers rippled behind him. His ticket gleamed first class, yet the attendant's hand blocked his way like a wall. Other passengers walked past, smiling, laughing, sliding their passports under the scanner, while he remained frozen in disbelief. The attendant's tone was polite but firm, her eyes cold and certain. "Sir, this line is for first-class passengers only." The crowd watched, expecting him to retreat, but he simply reached into his pocket and made a single phone call that would silence an entire airline. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe to Racism Untold Stories, where real-life power meets truth and every injustice finds its voice. The morning unfurled with clinical precision inside Pearson International Airport. The polished floors gleamed beneath a ceiling of glass and steel, mirroring the streams of travelers that drifted like tides, some rushing, others gliding, all chasing destinations and dreams. Announcements echoed from overhead speakers, a mechanical voice repeating gate numbers in perfect monotony. The smell of roasted coffee blended with jet fuel and perfume, the aroma of motion and ambition. In the middle of that orchestrated chaos walked Marcus Ellison, 42 years old, a man shaped by both brilliance and restraint. Every movement he made carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to power. His navy blue suit was tailored to perfection, subtle pinstripes catching the morning light. A platinum watch glimmered at his wrist, and his black leather briefcase, custom-made, initials discreetly embossed, swung rhythmically at his side. He was heading to Zurich for an international energy conference where he would be keynote speaker. His company, Ellison Global Technologies, had developed a new method for distributing clean energy more equitably across impoverished regions. Nations were beginning to listen. Investors had begun to believe. But Marcus knew that in every boardroom, every partnership meeting, every glass-walled negotiation, there was still a silent battle he had to fight before his ideas could even enter the room. He had grown used to the double takes, the questioning smiles, the quiet disbelief that someone like him could be the man in charge. He had learned how to steady his voice against assumptions. He knew the art of staying composed when others expected him to break. Years of coded language had built his armor. "You speak so well. You carry yourself so professionally. You are not like the others." Each phrase was meant as a compliment, but each one whispered the same truth. He was still seen as an exception, never the norm. Marcus took his time moving through the terminal, his mind not on Zurich yet, but on the rhythm of the world around him. The janitor sweeping in silence as executives walked past. The elderly man in a faded jacket counting change at a vending machine. The young family with mixed-race children laughing at a window, the father pointing out the planes. He noticed the details others missed, the hierarchies within ordinary spaces. The gate number blinked above the crowd. C-19, Zurich, first-class boarding, 9:45 a.m. He arrived early, as always, preferring calm over haste. The first-class lounge greeted him with soft lighting and muted conversation. Plush armchairs in neutral tones formed quiet islands of luxury. A row of businessmen murmured over laptops, their eyes flicking up occasionally as Marcus entered. He could feel the subtle change in air, the small pause that often followed his presence in rooms not accustomed to diversity. He nodded politely to the attendant at the counter, a young woman with a clipped accent and a courteous smile. Her tone was perfectly measured, yet her gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary, as though reconciling what she saw with what she expected. He gave his name and boarding pass, and she hesitated briefly before her expression smoothed. "Enjoy your stay, Mr. Ellison." He thanked her and took a seat near the window. Outside, aircraft rolled slowly across the tarmac, wings slicing through fog like silver blades. He took a slow breath. Flying was supposed to be routine for him by now. Meetings, contracts, investors, repeat. But something about airports always reminded him of his beginnings. He had grown up far from polished marble and designer suits. His childhood home had been a two-room apartment on Chicago's South Side, walls humming with the sounds of life and struggle. His mother, Denise Ellison, had worked two jobs, nurse by day, home aide by night. His father, when he was present, fixed cars in their cramped garage. There were no vacations, no flights, only the steady hum of survival. When Marcus earned his first business-class ticket years later, he remembered how it felt to step into that cabin for the first time. The smell of leather seats, the careful attention of flight attendants, the disbelief in the eyes of other passengers when he sat beside them. Even then, success had not shielded him from suspicion. It had only magnified it. Now, decades later, he had learned to carry that awareness like a shadow, always behind him, never leaving, even under the brightest lights. He finished his coffee and approached the gate just as boarding began. The crowd had gathered in loose clusters. The speaker announced, "Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 903 to Zurich." Marcus joined the line, his ticket already in hand. In front of him, two men in tailored coats chatted effortlessly about markets and mergers. They did not look back. Behind him, a young couple whispered about their honeymoon. He stood in quiet composure, exuding the same calm confidence that had carried him through every barrier before. But as the line advanced, the familiar rhythm of prejudice began its quiet intrusion. The gate agent, a woman with perfect posture and a pressed uniform, smiled warmly at each passenger before scanning their tickets. Her tone was friendly, professional, until she looked up at Marcus. The shift was immediate and unmistakable. Her smile faltered. Her eyes flicked to his boarding pass, then back to his face, as if she had encountered a problem her system could not process. "Sir, may I see your ticket again?" Her voice had changed, softer, hesitant, searching. Marcus handed it over without a word. She scanned it once, frowned, then typed something on her keyboard. Her colleague leaned in to look at the screen. The seconds stretched uncomfortably long. The businessman behind Marcus sighed audibly. Finally, she looked up. "Sir, I believe you are in the wrong line. This line is for first-class passengers." The words cut through the air like glass. Marcus felt the eyes around him sharpen, curiosity mixing with quiet judgment. He kept his expression still. "Please check again," he said evenly. "Seat 2A, first class." Her fingers danced over the keyboard again, tapping with unnecessary vigor. "I am not seeing it listed here. Perhaps there was an upgrade error?" An older man nearby muttered under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear, "They always try to sneak in. Happens all the time." Marcus did not turn toward him. His restraint was precise, controlled. Years of practice had taught him that anger was often mistaken for confirmation. The agent called for assistance, waving over another staff member. Their whispers carried tones of doubt, the kind reserved for those who did not fit the part. The second agent glanced at Marcus, then nodded toward the waiting area. "Sir, please step aside until we verify your ticket." He stepped aside, holding the same composure that had carried him through countless boardrooms filled with suspicion. Around him, passengers continued boarding, brushing past as though he were invisible. The plane filled, seat by seat, while he remained anchored in stillness. When the last of the passengers disappeared into the jet bridge, the gate agent finally spoke again. Her voice was tight, defensive. "Sir, it seems there was a system error. You are indeed in first class. My apologies for the confusion." Her apology sounded rehearsed, drained of sincerity. Marcus nodded once, saying nothing. He could have made a scene. He could have demanded names, written a complaint, recorded everything. But he did not need to. He knew that the truest power is quiet and patient, revealing itself when least expected. He walked toward the empty seating area near the large glass window, the hum of departing engines filling the silence around him. Outside, a plane lifted into the sky, disappearing into clouds. For Marcus, it was a reminder. Success could take him anywhere, but prejudice could still try to drag him back to the ground. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through his contacts. His eyes settled on one name, Harold Simmons, the chairman of Global Aviation Partners, the airline's parent company. He hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. Sometimes the universe did not need confrontation. It simply needed clarity. He tapped the name. The call connected instantly. And in that instant, the quiet man they had dismissed was about to remind the world who he truly was. The phone in Marcus's hand felt heavy, not from its weight, but from the silence that followed the first ring. The lounge buzzed faintly behind him, voices, footsteps, distant laughter, but to Marcus, the world had narrowed to that single call. When Harold Simmons, chairman of Global Aviation Partners, answered, his tone was light, casual, friendly. "Marcus, you are supposed to be on your way to Zurich by now. How is the flight?" Marcus looked toward the gate, where the attendants stood nervously whispering, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. His reflection glowed faintly in the glass behind them, steady, unreadable. "I am still on the ground," he said slowly. "Apparently, my presence in the first-class line was a concern to your staff." There was a pause, long and sharp. Then came Harold's voice again, lower this time, tense with disbelief. "What do you mean, a concern?" Marcus did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "They told me I was in the wrong line. Security was called. I was asked to step aside while they checked whether I was truly first class." The silence that followed carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Truths about perception, power, and race that men like Harold could afford to overlook. But Marcus could not. Harold finally exhaled. "Give me 5 minutes." When the call ended, Marcus slipped the phone back into his jacket pocket. He did not need to wait long. Within minutes, movement rippled across the gate area. Supervisors appeared from nowhere, their faces tight with urgency. The two attendants who had questioned Marcus stood rigid, glancing toward each other, then toward the growing line of uniformed managers rushing in. Passengers in the nearby seats began to sense that something had shifted. A murmur spread through the terminal, quiet curiosity turning into hushed speculation. The name Marcus Ellison was now being spoken behind closed office doors and urgent phone calls. The same airline that had dismissed him was now scrambling to correct itself. But Marcus did not move. He remained by the window, his posture calm, his hands folded lightly in front of him. Years of restraint had taught him that silence was not weakness, it was control. Soon the assistant manager arrived, a woman in a navy suit, her badge gleaming beneath fluorescent lights. Her face carried the brittle smile of someone walking into disaster control. "Mr. Ellison, we are terribly sorry for what happened. There seems to have been a technical error with your boarding record." Marcus looked at her, his gaze level and unblinking. "A technical error," he repeated softly as though tasting the words. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, eager to resolve the crisis. "It appears your ticket was not correctly verified in our system." He let the silence stretch. The woman shifted under it, fidgeting with her lanyard. "Would you say," Marcus asked quietly, "that it was a system error or a people error?" The woman hesitated. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was no answer she could give that would not expose the truth. Behind her, the two attendants stood frozen, their earlier superiority replaced with visible fear. They had not meant to create chaos. They had only followed instinct, the unspoken rule that a certain look belonged in a certain place. But that instinct was the system, and Marcus had simply forced it to reveal itself. He looked back toward the departing plane. The flight had already left. The empty jet bridge stood like a symbol of lost opportunity, except it was not his opportunity that had been lost. It was theirs. As Marcus gathered his belongings, the manager offered hurried apologies. We can place you on the next available flight, sir. We will upgrade your ticket, provide compensation. He raised a hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. I do not want compensation. The woman blinked, confused. Then what can we do for you, Mr. Ellison? Marcus turned toward her fully now, his expression steady, voice calm but edged with unmistakable authority. I want you to understand that your mistake was not in your computer. It was in your eyes. The words hung in the air, unshakable. He walked past them and exited the gate area without another glance. Behind him, silence followed like a shadow. The attendants did not speak. The passengers who had witnessed everything now looked down at their phones, pretending not to see. Outside the terminal, the day had shifted from bright to overcast. Clouds gathered above the runway, mirroring the turbulence unfolding within the airline's upper offices. By the time Marcus stepped into his car, the consequences were already in motion. Harold Simmons had made his second call, this time to the airline's executive headquarters. Within 30 minutes, emergency messages spread through the chain of command. Screens flashed, emails poured in. A public relations crisis was declared. In a matter of hours, the video footage began to circulate online. Someone in the terminal had recorded the entire scene. The attendant's dismissive tone, the officer's arrival, Marcus's composed stillness amid quiet humiliation. The clip spread with startling speed. By evening, hashtags began to trend. First class while black, the system at the gate, Ellison truth. Comment sections flooded with outrage and reflection. Some expressed disbelief that such a thing could still happen. Others confessed that they had seen it happen all too often. And some, those who did not understand, claimed it was just a misunderstanding. But the world had seen enough misunderstandings. As the video continued to spread, journalists reached out for statements. The airline remained silent, waiting for instructions from the top. Inside boardrooms, executives debated strategies, how to apologize without admitting fault, how to calm the storm without facing the truth. Meanwhile, Marcus remained at home that night, his phone buzzing with messages and calls from reporters, friends, and business partners. He ignored most of them. Instead, he sat in his quiet living room, looking out at the city lights below. He remembered his grandmother's words again. They will try to measure your worth by their comfort, not your character. Never let them succeed. He had spent his life proving her right. As the night deepened, the story began to reach international news outlets. Television anchors replayed the footage. Headlines appeared on screens across the world. Black CEO denied boarding in first class, airline under fire. Tech innovator faces racial profiling at airport gate. Ellison Global Technologies pauses partnership with major airline. Yes, that was the next decision. Marcus's company had ongoing projects with the same airline, worth millions in shared development. That night, he sent a single email to his executive team. Effective immediately, suspend all collaboration with global aviation partners pending public accountability. That message hit harder than any press statement. It was a strike not of revenge, but of principle. By dawn, the airline's stock had begun to fall. Investors demanded answers. The board of directors called for an emergency meeting. The same company that had dismissed Marcus as not belonging was now begging for his forgiveness. When Harold called again, his voice carried both guilt and urgency. Marcus, we are working to correct this. The staff responsible will be disciplined immediately. Marcus listened, calm and measured. This is not about discipline, Harold. It is about vision. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. He ended the call with the same grace with which he had endured humiliation hours before. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, casting long streaks of gold across his office floor. The world was beginning to see, perhaps for the first time, that power had no color and dignity needed no permission. Yet deep down, Marcus understood something even larger. This was never just about him. It was about every quiet moment when someone else was told they did not belong. Every gate, every door, every room that opened for some, but not for others. The rising tide of awareness had begun, and it was unstoppable. The sun had not yet risen when the first headlines appeared. They began as small posts, tucked into digital corners of social media, short captions paired with shaky footage taken from a bystander's phone. But within hours, the story of the man denied boarding in first class had spread across continents. The video showed everything: the composure on Marcus Ellison's face, the nervous laughter of onlookers, the shifting tone of the gate agent as realization dawned too late. Every detail became evidence, and every frame became a question the world could no longer ignore. By mid-morning, major news outlets had seized the story. Television screens across airports began to flicker with the same headline: Prominent Black CEO denied boarding. Airline faces allegations of racial bias. Executives inside the airline's headquarters watched in silence. The footage played on loop in their glass conference room, reflections of their anxious faces overlapping with Marcus's calm one. His stillness had become an indictment. His dignity was the sharpest weapon of all. No amount of corporate phrasing could soften what millions were witnessing. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a technical glitch. It was the oldest story dressed in a modern uniform, prejudice hidden behind protocol. Inside the boardroom, voices rose in panic. We must issue a statement immediately. Delete the footage wherever possible. Find the passenger, offer compensation, anything. But before they could act, Marcus had already made his move. At precisely 9 a.m., Ellison Global Technologies released a statement across all media platforms. We have suspended all collaborative projects with global aviation partners pending public accountability and corrective action. Prejudice cannot fly beneath the radar when integrity demands visibility. The words echoed with precision, calm, direct, and immovable. The impact was immediate. Within minutes, analysts began reporting drops in the airline's market value. Investors demanded explanations. Social activists and business leaders rallied behind Marcus, sharing the story as a symbol of how systemic bias still thrived in the most polished spaces of privilege. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed. He did not appear on television. He did not deliver interviews. His silence became the story itself. A man so powerful he did not need to shout for justice to be heard. Across social media, hashtags multiplied. First Class While Black trended globally. People from different backgrounds shared their own experiences of quiet discrimination, stories that had never made the news but now found courage through his example. A movement had begun, unplanned yet unstoppable. Inside the airline, the chaos deepened. The chief executive officer, Robert Lang, sat at the head of a long table, his tie loosened, his face pale. His advisors argued around him, voices clashing like storms. This is spiraling out of control, one said. We should have addressed it immediately, said another. We cannot admit fault, a third insisted. It will destroy investor confidence. But Robert knew the truth. He had built his reputation on clean branding and luxury optics, yet now the very image he had curated was collapsing under the weight of reality. The cameras outside his headquarters were multiplying by the minute. He rubbed his temples and whispered, "Who is this man?" One of his executives replied, "Marcus Ellison, founder of Ellison Global Technologies. His company provides the fuel optimization software we depend on for international flights." Robert froze. The blood drained from his face. In his effort to protect the illusion of exclusivity at the boarding gate, his own company had humiliated one of its largest business partners. The irony was cruel, poetic, and complete. Within the hour, he called for a press conference. Cameras gathered in front of the building as reporters shouted questions. Robert stepped forward, his voice trembling beneath the weight of public scrutiny. "We deeply regret the events that occurred yesterday at Toronto International Airport involving Mr. Marcus Ellison," he said. "This incident does not reflect our values. We are conducting an internal review." But the world had heard enough apologies like that before. Polished, hollow, practiced. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus sat in his quiet office watching the broadcast on mute. His reflection appeared faintly in the window, steady, unbroken. Behind him, his assistant hovered near the doorway. "Sir," she said softly, "the press keeps requesting your response. Everyone is waiting for your statement." Marcus turned his gaze from the screen. "They have heard my response," he said. "It is in my silence." For a long moment, he looked out at the skyline. The glass towers shimmered in the morning light, symbols of ambition and illusion. He had climbed his way to this height not to prove his worth, but to expose how easily the powerful could mistake dignity for threat. Later that afternoon, as the world continued to buzz with outrage, a private meeting was scheduled between Marcus and the airline's senior executives. They arrived at his office in black sedans, escorted by public relations advisors who whispered frantic notes before entering. When they stepped inside, the air felt colder than it should have. Marcus stood by the window, the skyline framing him like a portrait of composure. Robert Lang was the first to speak. "Mr. Ellison, I cannot express how sorry we are. The employees responsible have been terminated. We take full accountability for what happened." Marcus did not turn around. "Accountability," he repeated quietly. "Tell me, Mr. Lang, what does that word mean to you?" Robert hesitated. "It means acknowledging the mistake, taking corrective action." "It means understanding," Marcus interrupted gently. "It means change. That does not end when the headlines fade." Silence followed. The executives shifted uneasily. Marcus finally turned to face them. His expression was calm, but his presence carried a weight that filled the room. "You see," he continued, "your staff did not need training to act as they did. They acted on the lessons society already taught them, that power has a color and worth has a face." Robert swallowed hard. The truth was too precise to deflect. Marcus stepped closer, his voice measured. "I am not asking for an apology. I am asking for a transformation. Create a policy that ensures no passenger, no person, is ever judged before they are seen. Change your systems. Train your people. Face your truth. Only then will your apology mean something." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of his words hung between them like a moral storm. Robert finally nodded, defeated yet awakened. "We will begin immediately." Marcus gave a faint nod. "Then perhaps this was not humiliation," he said quietly. "Perhaps it was education." When they left, the silence in the office felt sacred, as though something vast and invisible had shifted. Outside, the world continued to react. News anchors debated whether this moment marked a turning point. Activists called it a milestone for visibility. Corporate leaders issued promises to review internal policies. But beneath all the noise, the truth was simple and pure. A man who had once been told he did not belong had just forced an entire industry to confront the reason why. By evening, the headlines changed. Airline announces Global Anti-Discrimination Initiative following Ellison scandal. Marcus Ellison's quiet power sparks worldwide corporate reform. The tide of opinion turned. What had begun as an act of prejudice had become a movement toward transformation. In every airport lounge, in every boarding gate, the whispers began to shift, from disbelief to recognition. The image of Marcus Ellison standing calmly before those who doubted him had become an emblem of dignity under fire. And as night fell, one truth became undeniable. The man they tried to keep off the plane had lifted an entire world to a higher altitude. The following weeks reshaped everything. What had begun as a single act of quiet defiance transformed into a moral reckoning. that reached far beyond one terminal or one company. The incident that humiliated Marcus Ellison had become a mirror the world could not look away from. Airports across continents began reviewing their passenger protocols. Training programs were rewritten to include not only customer service procedures, but also the history of bias and the psychology of implicit prejudice. Airline executives found themselves attending seminars once reserved for social justice advocates. Human resources departments started to look less like bureaucratic chambers and more like classrooms. The world was learning slowly but irreversibly what Marcus had already known: dignity does not require permission. For weeks, journalists attempted to schedule interviews with him. Every publication wanted his story, his reaction, his headline. Yet Marcus continued his work as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He arrived early to his office, reviewed contracts, met with engineers, and guided his company through another round of innovation. But beneath that surface calm, something inside him had changed. He had spent years trying to prove that excellence was enough, that intellect, success, and contribution could silence prejudice. The incident taught him otherwise. Prejudice was not deaf to achievement, it was indifferent to it. Respect was not earned through titles, but demanded through truth. One morning, as sunlight spilled through his office windows, Marcus stood before a framed photograph on his wall. It showed his parents standing proudly beside him at his university graduation. His mother's eyes were wet with joy, his father's arm firm around his shoulder. He remembered his father's voice that night. Never let the world convince you that your place is smaller than the one you built. Now, years later, those words held deeper weight. His assistant entered quietly. "Sir, the Global Aviation Initiative just published their new diversity charter. They credited you by name in the preamble." Marcus smiled faintly. "Credit is not the goal," he said. "Change is." Still, when he opened the report later that evening, he felt something stir. The policy outlined equal treatment standards for all passengers, expanded anti-discrimination education for employees, and committed a percentage of profits to programs supporting minority students pursuing careers in aviation. It was not perfection, but it was progress, and progress was all change ever promised at first. Across cities, people began to speak his name not with pity, but with pride. Communities that had long remained silent about everyday prejudice found their voices. Corporate leaders began quoting his words in speeches about reform. Even government ministers referenced his case when drafting new inclusion laws. Marcus did not seek fame, yet it followed him like a reflection he could not escape. Invitations arrived for him to speak at universities, leadership forums, and international summits. He declined most of them. He did not want to become a symbol detached from his humanity. Still, one invitation caught his attention: a graduation ceremony at his old university. When he arrived, he was greeted by applause that felt like thunder. Rows of young faces watched him with anticipation, some holding up copies of the article that had made him famous. He stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and waited for the room to quiet. He began softly. "You will be told that the world is fairer than it truly is. You will also be told that anger solves nothing. The truth lies between those two lies. The world can become fairer, but only if you remain angry enough to change it." The room fell still. His voice deepened, steady and clear. "When I was denied entry onto that plane, I could have shouted, I could have demanded, but I stood silent. Not because I accepted it, but because I understood that silence can sometimes speak louder than fury. My calm was not surrender. It was strength measured in stillness." He paused, meeting the eyes of the students in the front row. "Your silence, your voice, your work, they are all forms of resistance. Choose them wisely and never mistake dignity for weakness. Because every time you carry yourself with truth in a dishonest world, you teach it how to heal." When he finished, the audience rose in unison. It was not mere applause. It was acknowledgement, an understanding that his story belonged to all who had ever been told they did not belong. After the ceremony, Marcus stood alone in the courtyard as evening descended. The air was cool and filled with the scent of rain. For the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to breathe without tension. He looked up at the sky, watching planes cross the horizon, their trails glowing gold in the fading sunlight. Somewhere inside, he felt the faint ache of forgiveness, not for those who had wronged him, but for the world itself, for taking so long to learn what should have been simple. That night, he returned home and opened a letter he had received earlier that day. It was from the gate agent who had refused him boarding, the woman whose voice had been trembling in the viral video. Her handwriting was small and uneven. "Mr. Ellison, I have no excuse for what I did. I have watched the footage over and over, and I can see the fear in my own eyes, the kind that comes from ignorance, not malice. I lost my job, but I also found something more valuable, the truth about who I had become. I am now working with a nonprofit that helps train service workers on bias awareness. I want to thank you for not destroying me when you could have. You showed mercy when the world demanded vengeance. That changed me." Marcus folded the letter carefully. He did not smile, but his eyes softened. Redemption, he thought, was the quietest form of justice. Weeks later, as the frenzy faded and new headlines replaced the old, Marcus continued to move forward. His company flourished, his influence expanded, and his calm became a model of leadership for a generation that valued both empathy and power. But the true impact of that day at the airport was not measured in policies, profits, or public praise. It lived in the hearts of ordinary people who began to see the world differently. A father who once told his son to keep his head down now told him to stand tall. A young woman stopped apologizing for taking up space. A security officer hesitated before judging the next traveler by their appearance. Marcus had not sought to change the world. He had simply refused to let it change him. Yet in doing so, he changed everything around him. The world now moved forward with a new awareness, that equality was not granted by law, but guarded by conscience. And so, when people spoke of Marcus Ellison, they did not call him a victim. They called him a mirror. Through his quiet defiance, humanity had seen its reflection, and for once, it had chosen to look closer. If this story moved you, let it not end here. Let it begin within you. Stand against silent prejudice wherever it hides, in workplaces, in schools, in daily life. Speak with truth, act with compassion, and remember that dignity needs no defense. Share this story so others may see what calm courage looks like and join the call for a world where every seat, in every class, belongs to every soul.